Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining. I hope you've been learning new and interesting stuff since the start of the conference. So, I'm going to be talking about Angular libraries with Monorepos. And before we start, a bit about myself. So, my name is Nishu Goel and I work as a software engineer at a company called The DataWorks. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a Google developer expert in web technologies. Most of my work revolves around front end technologies, and whenever I have some free time or something interesting to share, I would write code labs or blog posts around that. So let's get started. Most of my talk would revolve around, first of all, understanding why do we need libraries, what is the steps involved in the creation of a library, and how do we build libraries. Finally, we'll look at what are monorepos and how we can build mono libraries inside monorepos and the NX way of doing it. So let's try to capture all of this in these 20 minutes that we have. So the first question, whenever we look at a topic like libraries using monorepos, that comes to our mind is that why libraries? Why do we even need libraries? Maybe we just need to build this feature. We could simply build it inside a project and get done with it. Why to create a separate application or a library workspace for that? So let's try to understand this through an example, right? For example, you were doing this project and it involved a very cool feature that you were developing, and it did involve quite some time and effort. Now after you're done with it, you're very proud of it since you built this cool feature, and you go to a different project and you saw a similar requirement there. You did this particular feature in this project and you come across the same requirement in this new project of yours, and that's when it clicks you that maybe you could build it as some reusable piece that you could just pick from one place and then just use it inside this other project, and you'll not have to do it from scratch or even write any code for that. So that's when the idea of reusability comes to your mind, and this look that you have right now on your face kind of fades away, right? Because now you understand how it could be helpful. So that's when you become curious about how libraries could help you, what are the different features that a library could have. And if you google the technical definition of libraries, this is what you come across. It says a library in programming is basically a collection of pre-compiled routines that a program could use. And this is kind of exactly what we're trying to do when we're building libraries as a reusable piece. So it says that okay, there's some compiled feature already that a program could use, and in fact many different programs could use the same feature, the pre-compiled feature that you have. And the different features that a library could have, or what basically a library is comprised of, is that it would either contain components of features, or just one component if it's a very small feature library. If it's like it could be sufficed in this one component, and it contains modules of code if it's a large library, for example. It has this shareable code. Shared code is the main feature of building libraries and monorepos. Then your library should have this reusable functionality, and that's kind of the whole idea why we are convinced that okay, let's build a library. And your library should have a dedicated code for a feature, and this kind of makes it very clear in our heads that okay, if this is a particular feature that I like, why not build it as a separate library, so that if anytime in the future I come across a similar requirement, I could just pick up this particular bundle and use it inside the other project of mine, instead of going through the so many different code bundles, or just one workspace or just one application which might have that code anywhere in the app. So this is kind of the first place where you understand okay, that's why I want to build this feature as a library inside this one bundle. And this is a very interesting image that I found in one of the talks by Yuri, and it describes how your application comprises of different applications and JavaScript files and external libraries or internal libraries and tools, and that's what builds the whole application together. So for example, this is one Angular application which comprises of many different Angular libraries and JavaScript libraries or files, and this is what makes up your whole application. So you see how your application could be brought down to so many individual pieces which actually make up your application, right? And that's why a library is basically known as the smallest set of logically connected code. and that's what we should try to stick to when we are building our libraries, because we don't want to add in any extra code which is not this dedicated code for the feature that we are trying to build inside our library. So it should be this smallest code which has this particular feature, and it's all logically connected inside this bundle. And that's when that's when we get oriented towards building a library. And now that we understand that, okay, this is why I want to build a library, this is why a library is required and could be helpful, and that's when you dive deeper into understanding the features and looking at the architecture that you might need to follow, or if there's a specific document that you could follow to ensure that your library compiles and is compatible with the rest of the Angular applications or the whole ecosystem per se. So the first thing that you need to understand as a feature of a library is that an Angular library should be platform independent. And what that means is that it should work with your Angular apps, which work with Angular Universal or server-side rendering, web workers. Your Angular library should be bundled and distributed, because that's what we are hoping to do with our libraries. It should be AOT compilation ready, so we should be able to build our library ahead of time. And the place where you were thinking about your library being compatible with the other Angular applications or the whole Angular's ecosystem, and if you could follow any set architecture or hierarchy for that, Angular package format is the right document for that. This is basically the recommended way of distributing your Angular packages, and this tells that if this is the process that you follow for building your libraries, your library would be just like other Angular packages and would be compatible with the rest of the Angular ecosystem. And it talks about how your module definition should be defined, and your metadata file, which basically defines how your app library would be AOT compilation ready. It defines the entry point for your library, and if you want to understand entry point in short, you can think of it as kind of the face of your library, because the entry point, the file that's the entry point to your app, basically tells the consuming applications that this is what is exported from the library, this is what you could import in the consuming application and use up from the library. And then it creates different typing files for your library, so it will be a typed Angular library. And the different steps in the process of creating a library, which now happen under the hood, but then we should have those in our mind because we are doing it from scratch. So first of all, we should have all our templates inlined, the styles and the templates for a particular Angular component. They should be inlined, because when we are bundling the library, we don't want 4 different files for a particular component, right? We should when the next step is that it compiles through the ngc compiler. So your one component goes through that, which is basically one file, because you have all your styles and templates inlined, and then it generates different one bundle or different bundles in different build formats. It would produce one bundle in ESM 2015 UMD format, ESM 5, which with Angular 10 does not happen anymore. As you can see, it's striked off. And all of this that you saw just now, you don't have to do that, because ng-packager does that. ng-packager was an individual library that used to do the bundling task and inlining all the template tasks for you earlier, but now it's integrated with the Angular CLI, and it all happens under the hood in the Angular CLI. So you basically have to use the same ng-generate schematic for your library, just like other ng-generate app, component, module. Similarly, you could use ng-generate library, and all of these steps would happen under the hood for you. And what it basically does is that it would create the libraries in Angular package format, so that's taken care of. It would create all the required bundles, it would create the type definition files, AOT metadata file, and would inline all the styles and the template. And this is kind of the configuration that we would then have inside our Angular JSON, wherein we specify what is the entry file, because now ng-packager is running under the hood, and this is the default entry file for your library, which is public api.ts file, and it would basically look like this. You're exporting whatever you want to export from your library to be able to access those in the consuming applications. And this is the schematic which you can use then to create your first library, which is ng-generate library and the library name. Now, when you're building your library, when you're creating and building your library, the very first step in the process is to have a workspace. where do you build your library? You would not want to have an Angular application, a regular Angular application, to be building your library inside, because having an application doesn't make sense if the whole idea for you is to just have a library. So instead of building an Angular application, you could just create a workspace using the same ng-new and the name of your workspace, and then you could pass in the flag create application as false, because you don't want all the app component file, the root component files inside your workspace, because you're anyway not creating an Angular application. Once you have the workspace ready, you could then go ahead and create your first library inside that workspace, which is the first first project inside your workspace, which is a library. So you do ng generate library and the library name, and as you can see, it would create all these different files inside the projects folder, which is basically supposed to hold all other different projects, which can be an application or a library inside this folder. And it would look something like this. So you see how you have the technique lib folder inside this projects folder, which is one of the projects, and you have all your library related files inside that. And if you then go ahead and create any other project or any other application or library inside this same workspace, you could just have it like projects, and then under the projects folder you would have your library or the new app that you created. It could be the consuming application or just a different application altogether. And this is kind of the same structure that you would see when we'll be using NX to be building our workspace and having a hierarchical structure for different apps and libraries. Moving on, so let's suppose that we have just built our library, we've just created our library, and it has the necessary logic that we need to have in our library. It has the business logic and the feature that we're trying to build through our library. Once we have that, we finally want to build our library and show and flaunt it to all the users that we have as target users. So you build your library, and you could simply use the command ng build and the name of your library. And once you do that, it will create this build folder, and as you can see here, these are the different steps it goes through, which we already discussed. It compiles using the ngc compiler, creates the different build formats. It also produces the flat bundles. Once it does that, it creates a path for you and a dist folder which will contain all the produced file. And as you can see here, as a warning, it says that currently it's not recommended to publish IV libraries, but if you've gone through the Angular roadmap, the recent Angular roadmap, you would know that this is kind of the next thing that we are looking forward to. And this is where the bundles come into picture, wherein we just talked about that we would have the ESM 2015 bundle and the UMD bundles, also the flat bundles for them, but we don't have ES5 bundle anymore. And the reason for that is that with the latest Angular version, we don't have a default support for the ES5 browsers, but you could down level to ES5, and that happens at the end of the build process. And you see how we end up with three different and you see how we end up with three different packet.json files now. One, the root packet.json. Second, which is in the libraries packet.json, which contains information about your library versioning or the peer dependencies for your library. And the third is in the distribution folder for your library, which is the packet.json, which contains information about your produced library, the bundle. And when you've built your library, the next quick step in the process is to pack your library and then maybe publish it to NPM, or just give the package to your colleagues or anybody who wants to use it, or just keep it with yourself. So you build your library, you've built your library, you're packing your library now using the npm pack command, and this is the contents that gets packed in the process. You have your public API file, which is the entry file, your code related to the feature that you've written for your library, or any other information like the typing files, the metadata file, etc. And it produces a tgz file, which is basically the package for your library. This is what contains the whole information related to your library. This is what you pass on to your colleagues. And now that we have created, built, and packaged our library, let's look at a more smarter way of dealing with libraries, more doing libraries more effectively and productively. And let's look at how NX does it, right? Because NX handles projects and workspaces inside one monorepo inside one workspace. So before we get started with that, let's understand and be on the same page about what monorepos are actually. So we know that monorepos tell us that there should be this single workspace for having your different applications and libraries. And it says that the only purpose of having a monorepo, it's not just shared code, it's not just to have shared code between different libraries, but also to divide your library into smaller libraries. Maybe there are several features inside your library which could actually be broken down into smaller features which your library contains. So that way you could have many libraries which combine and comprise the features of one particular big library. And the idea of a monorepo basically says that there are different applications and libraries inside your workspace, and all of that have a common third-party dependencies, or let's just put it this way, that all of those have a common node modules folder. So whichever version of Angular core you have would be the same for all the different apps and libraries. So it needs to have the similar version and same third-party dependencies. So now that we have an idea about what monorepos are, let's look at how and what basically NX helps us to do that. It says that different features can be different libraries, which we just talked about, and it says that most of the code inside a workspace should be inside your libraries, inside different libraries for different features, and any code that is related to the configuration or the configuration of the environment, or routing related, your router config or any routing related environment keys or information like that, could be put inside the apps folder. So we just keep the apps folder for the configuration related stuff. However, any code, any business logic that we write, any code related to the combination of or communication between different libraries should be in the libraries itself, different libs folder. So that kind of architects our whole application, that we have two different things inside this one workspace. We have libs, different libs, we have apps or just one app, and all the business logic and feature related code stays in the libraries, and we keep the apps only for the configuration related stuff, be it routing related configuration or the environment related configuration, right? And as per NX, we have these kind of different libraries, and this kind of basically specifies and helps us understand that what kind of code should go where inside the workspace. So these can be the different libraries that you have. You have feature libraries, which basically contain the code for any business logic code that you're writing. That would be inside the feature libraries. That basically comprises the feature that you're building. Then you would have the UI libraries, which is just the presentational components which you only want to show and which look very good on the in the consuming application, for example. That's the UI libraries. That's basically what shows on the UI. Then you have the data access libraries. Those are basically about getting the data from the service which comes from the backend, or communication between different libraries that happens through the service. I mean communication between the different components, etc. Then you have utility libraries, which basically define the code for getting the data from, and this basically is the library config that multiple libraries might need. So moving on, how do you do that with NX? So you would define an NX workspace, and as you would know that NX CLI is basically based on the Angular CLI. It's just a little step further in that with respect to how opinionated its approach is to dealing with workspaces, multiple apps and libraries, how you should have libraries having this code but then your apps having this other type of code. So that's the NX CLI's way of doing it. So you simply define your NX workspace, in which you can then have your different projects and in a particular hierarchy, and then you can use the ng-generate schematic to just like the Angular CLI, you can use the ng-generate library, ng-generate app, and so on. When you do that, you would want to know some of the pros of using NX when dealing with single workspace and having your different libraries inside this single workspace. One is that since now all of your code is inside this one place, you have your apps in here, you have your libraries in here, the import process should be very easy, because this is where your library is, this is where your application is, this is where you're exporting the data from, the components or the libraries or the services, and this is where you're consuming it, if it might be inside another library or inside another application altogether. So that's where your import process will become a lot more easier, because all of the data is inside this one workspace. The other thing which is a great advantage with using NX for your libraries inside one workspace is that you would have restricted dependencies. And what this means is that, for example, you have this application and you want to import the packages or the functionality from library A and library B, but you want to restrict the any feature from library C. You could do that. So that's about restricting dependencies in NX, using NX. And this kind of brings me to the end of how NX helps us build libraries and providing those inside the single workspace and having it hierarchically. And this is the different repos that I've put in here for you to understand how we could do it. One is about creating a library. Second is about consuming it, which is inside a different application, which could be inside the same workspace or a different workspace altogether. And these are some great resources that I followed when I was first doing the library. It's obviously the Angular documentation and the NX documentation. Then this is one great course which talks about structuring your whole Angular application, like Angular libraries with Angular libraries. And there's this simple article about following and creating your first library step by step. So if you're a newbie to libraries, you could follow this and create your library. And in the end, I would just like to thank you all very much for being here and enjoying the sessions. And you could follow me on Twitter at this username or on GitHub. Thank you very much.